was a very typical day's work spreading fertilizer. The weather had been bad and had finally improved, so there was a fair bit of catching up to do. It was okay to start with, but I hadn't realized that the field was still so wet. Anyway, about the fourth pass, coming back down, I started to slide. I put the brakes on, but they didn't do anything. I know what to do in that sort of situation. I tried to keep it straight, but I lost control. I said I was very lucky not to be killed. I was badly concussed, had a broken arm and a fractured pelvis, and got thrown about like a pea in a can. I was off work for 18 months.
Like many similar incidents, this accident was entirely avoidable. He was lucky. Others aren't so fortunate. Every year there are numerous accidents involving agricultural vehicles working on sloping ground. Some ultimately end in death. In fact, over 1/3 of fatal tractor accidents occur on slopes. You may be very competent and your vehicle extremely sophisticated, but despite this, even a gentle slope can be dangerous. Do the wrong thing and you could end up dead. None of these accidents would have happened if the drivers had correctly assessed the situation, spotted the danger, and taken care. Most accidents on slopes happen when the vehicle loses traction and the driver loses control. John hadn't realized that the ground was wet enough to make it slippery, and although the slope wasn't very steep, there was always the possibility that his vehicle might lose its grip. Going up the hill, he was getting a good grip, helped by the weight of the fertilizer spreader on the back wheels. To start with, he was okay going back downhill, but as the weight of the fertilizer started to reduce, so did the traction on the back wheels. If the conditions had been different, it may have been okay, but it was wet and there was no grip. John lost control and there was nothing he could do about it. Drivers must correctly assess the situation, the ground conditions, their vehicle, and the job in hand, and putting these together, decide if it's safe to continue.
I had a nasty accident here last year. You wouldn't believe it was possible, because there isn't much of a slope. But there'd been a light rain since early in the morning, and the field started to get a bit slippery. With the extra weight from the roller, I just started to slide. I rolled it right over.
There's no hard and fast rule about how steep a slope needs to be before it becomes hazardous. Under the wrong conditions, even the most gentle of inclines can cause a vehicle to slip. Vehicles behave differently depending on the type of surface, and this will change with the weather. What was perfectly safe one day may be a disaster the next. As we've seen from Steve's accident, lush, wet spring grass can be very slippery. The heavy roller was a dead weight behind him and wasn't putting any weight onto the back wheels. It was pushing him down the hill. With poor grip, the vehicle started to slide and he lost control. But change the conditions and it becomes a different story. Slightly shorter grass gives better grip, and this will improve as it dries out. But beware, if it gets too dry, there's less traction and you are again in danger of starting to slip. The traction you get on cultivated land will depend on the soil type, and it can vary enormously. So you need to think carefully about the soil you're working and how it's going to behave. This is providing fairly good grip because the tyres are biting and the soil is actually providing support. And if it becomes wet, it can actually improve the grip. But watch out, because if it dries right out and becomes dry and dusty, you may find it provides very little grip. And if it was heavy clay or sand, it would behave completely differently. That's why you need to assess the soil you're working and decide what will happen. Look for the danger signs.
It's hard to judge. I just do it by experience, I suppose. A change in the weather can make a huge difference. It can be like an ice rink if there's a heavy dew. Then it'll dry out during the day and get much better. I got caught once, never again.
The overriding principle with sloping ground is never presume it's safe until you have evidence to show otherwise. Think about the surface, its condition, the severity of the slope, and whether there'll be any problems, and what you can do to avoid them. Weigh them up properly, or pay the cost.
While young Sarah was doing a bit of work on the trees we'd planted, it was very steep up there and not much use for anything else. It was a very old vehicle. We just used it round the farm, not on the road. It needed new tyres and a lot of work on the mechanics. The four-wheel drive was a bit dodgy and kept jumping out. Anyway, I didn't think it was worth spending any money on it. She took a shortcut across the field rather than go the long way round on the road. She must have been going too fast, because she ended up tumbling it down the hill. It rolled over a couple of times. She was dead when we found her.
In this instance, the combination of worn tyres, disengaged four-wheel drive, and the inexperience of the driver ended in tragedy. Vehicles need to be in good condition, especially the critical things like tyres, brakes and steering, as well as the transmission. Because the four-wheel drive was ineffective, there was much less control over the vehicle. This is a typical characteristic of two-wheel drive and applies just as much to tractors. Going downhill, there's no traction on the front, so under the wrong conditions, the vehicle can lose traction. But with decent tyres and effective four-wheel drive, it would have been a different story, because four-wheel drive provides engine braking on the front wheels, giving more control and stability. Four-wheel drive will always be an advantage, but the vehicle also needs to be big enough to do the job and manage whatever equipment you're using. This means weight and size of the vehicle, not just the engine capacity. It wants to stick to the ground.
I'd sent Chris out to spread some slurry. He was using the small four-wheel drive, which should have been okay, but he forgot to weigh the front down enough. The weight on the back was too much. Going up the hill, it was pulling the weight off the front, and the wheels lost their grip. Well, it appears that he slewed round and started to roll. He died on the way to hospital.
In a situation like this, the control can be improved with the correct ballast, which will help to hold the front wheels down. This is especially important with heavy equipment on the back. If you're working across a slope, fitting dual wheels can improve your weight distribution and lateral stability. And on that note, the type of tyres you use can make a huge difference. Utility tyres and low-pressure tyres each have different characteristics. You need to know how they're going to behave. The type of vehicle you use and its condition can make a huge difference to your safety. Preferably four-wheel drive, properly ballasted, and with suitable tyres that are in good condition. On sloping ground, the wrong choice can cost you dearly.
I were working across the slope. I got to the end and tried to turn, and over we went. I turned downhill, which is where I think I went wrong. Broke the tractor and did myself a lot of damage.
If you have to work across a slope, the golden rule is to take your turns uphill, which is much safer because you keep the traction on the rear wheels. In this instance, the farmer would have been better starting at the bottom of the field and then working across the slope, making uphill turns the obvious choice. If you're doing work where you have to get tight to the headland, you may need to do a 3-point turn, turning uphill first. If you're ploughing, you'll probably be working across the slope because furrows straight up and down the hill may lead to soil erosion. But take care because you need to start at the top and work down, so the uphill wheel is in the bottom of the furrow, which will help to level you out. Because of the considerable weight on the back, you need to do a 3-point turn, starting down the hill. If you're working up and down a hill, you'll find it much safer to go up than down. Going down, the centre of gravity acts towards the front, taking traction off the rear and increasing the possibility of a slide, whereas going back up, the centre of gravity acts on the rear, which improves traction on the back wheels. The manufacturer's instructions will give you guidance on the safest way to use the vehicle, but whatever you're doing, always select the right gear to avoid stopping or changing gear on the slope. The way you plan a job can make a huge difference to your efficiency and safety, and take into account any obstacles which could affect you, like trees, ditches and holes.
I've driven across that field enough times without any problem. I was moving some bales on the front loader, and looking back on it, I suppose I did so many things wrong that day. I suppose I had the load a bit high and hadn't even shut the door. Anyway, the front wheel went down a hole and the jolt, well, that was enough to tip me over.
A sudden move like this can affect your stability enough to put you at risk, particularly with a large weight like a bale on the front. In this instance, the load was too high and too far forward. He was unstable and the centre of gravity was too high. Even a small hole was a problem. You need to look at what you're doing and work out the safest route. Keep a safe and constant speed. Think about how your direction of travel and your load will affect your centre of gravity and your stability. And avoid obstacles like animal holes, ditches and ruts. Otherwise you could find yourself in some serious trouble.
I could see Bob going down the track on the other side of the valley. All of a sudden the trailer started to push him down the hill. The tractor lost its grip and started to slide. Really surprising because it's hardly a slope at all. Well, it jackknifed and turned over. Bob tried to jump clear and got crushed. Poor bloke. He should have stayed in the cab. I'm sure he'd have survived.
Bob's accident clearly shows the danger of working with trailed equipment. Even with a four-wheel drive vehicle, the weight of the trailer started to push him down the hill. This situation is typical of four-wheeled, trailed equipment, where there's no weight distributed to the drawbar. It's simply a dead weight, pushing the vehicle downhill, which can lead to jackknifing and a slide. But ideally, a trailer should be fitted with its own brakes, so it can do its share of the braking. With equipment with a central axle, if it's badly loaded, it can lift the drawbar, taking weight and consequently the traction off the rear wheels. It's not such a problem with unbalanced equipment, because weight is being transferred onto the drawbar, which helps to hold the rear down and provide more traction.
After Bob's death, I had brakes fitted on the trailer, which makes a huge difference. You've still got to be careful, but you do have more control. It made me think about all our equipment and how safe they're going to be on the hill. Sprayers, spreaders, and the materials handler.
Each vehicle and setup will present slightly different working conditions and problems on a slope. With mounted equipment like this sprayer, weight is being loaded onto the back of the vehicle, which helps with rear wheel traction, but reduces the stability at the front. With the correct front end ballast, this can be counterbalanced. However, with something like a sprayer or fertilizer spreader, the load is continually reducing and altering the balance of your vehicle. As it gets lighter, there's less traction on the rear, which can be a problem going down the hill. On bumpy ground, it can also start to surge and upset your balance. Reversible ploughs can be a problem when you turn because of the momentum caused by their weight. Materials handlers and other front-end loaders can cause similar problems, particularly if there's a telescopic arm. It's not just a danger turning corners. Think what it'll do going up or down a slope. Keep the load low and close.
One of the things that did come to light was mowing and hedge cutting. We've got a lot of hedgerows and grass banks, and obviously with all the weight on one side, you're not very well balanced. Touch wood, we've been okay so far by putting some ballast in the offside tyres.
With hedge cutters and some mowers, there's a lot of weight on one side, so add ballast to the opposite side of the tractor. Most equipment you use will present a unique set of circumstances that you'll have to account for, but no more so than quad bike type ATVs. Stability is maintained by the driver shifting weight, so safety is down to the knowledge and experience of the driver. Becoming a skilled and proficient driver, particularly on hilly terrain, is not easy because there's a lot involved. By far the best thing to do is to get some specialist training. And however good you think you are, always wear a helmet. Whatever you're doing, you should only undertake a job if you've been properly trained. And when you're using equipment on a slope, make sure it's correctly set up. And always assess the conditions. With these in mind, you have to work out how it's affecting your stability and then take the necessary action. Get it wrong and you could be in trouble. There are a number of factors that can make working a slope hazardous. In isolation, they may not be a problem, but once you put them together, they can become dangerous. You have to weigh them up and decide whether it's safe to do the job and the best way to go about it. So, assess the ground conditions and use the most suitable vehicle, preferably four-wheel drive. Use a suitable gear and speed. Take into account the effects of any mounted or trailed equipment. Above all, never presume a situation is safe.
He was a good driver and had a real passion for vehicles. Had an old car he loved to tinker with. He'd been to college and come out with flying colours. Trouble was, I didn't check how much practical experience he'd had on slopes. It's really not the same as working on a flat field. We didn't even tell him what to do. I should have made sure he knew what he was doing. That wouldn't have cost much and could have saved his life. It's such a waste to lose someone at that age.